Can I ask some people to come in? We have a number of people out, and there's many people who are involved in this. But Tochi, we spoke about community. I mean, you've been on our webinars talking about Sisu from Finland and that strong community thing. We've got David Alexander, one of the leading academics in this area. We've got Bruce Mann, who was chair of, well, basically head of the Civil Contingency Secretariat in the UK Cabinet Office. You've all dealt with these issues on a very personal and professional basis. Sai, I know you've got expertise in this, as been demonstrated in your comments. Feel free to come in and make your voices heard. We would welcome that.
Well, the first of all, thank you, David, and thank you, Steve, for absolutely brilliant webinar as usually. One of the things that is sort of my weak point is that I'm looking at violence from a relatively small populations. Singapore, Hong Kong, or Finland, we're talking 5 to 7 million people, and I think that might also have an impact on having that small village mentality that you are not that faceless and you will be held responsible for your behavior in the neighborhood. Not sure about how Steve thinks about that.
Yeah, I think we've said this before to a degree about Hong Kong. The culture plays a very big role. And if it's a culture of caring and community that is to look out for each other, to not offend against each other, to take care of each other, the outcome in terms of violence suppression and so forth, I think is much more successful. If it's a culture that's more competitive, if there's less of a neighbor, helps neighbor sort of culture, I think you get a more significant and more adverse sort of outcome. I do want to speak for a moment, Tony, while you're on the floor, about the violence perspective, because I know you're very deeply involved in threat assessment and violence prevention. And you and I and our partner Jameson have worked on different tools for professionals in thinking about what would the effect of AI be on violence rates. And so over time, I've actually helped create a battery of screening tools for threat assessors to ask the right kind of questions during heat waves. And I kind of, come back to this idea of, was it foreseeable that this person we were concerned about committing violence may be more prone to violence during a heat wave than if it wasn't a heat wave? So even in that, your concern, and you kind of couched this a moment ago, and your concern is primarily in violence prevention. There are proactive things we could do in the professional community, which is start to train professionals to look at what is the influence in there. And then, as you said, the community norms. Well, in our community, we have more of a tradition, more of a culture of reaching out to each other, of caring for each other, and there's a benefit to that. So I think we do have to start weighing this in. Back to like what Milena said before, if we could start bringing this information to managers, to leaders, maybe we could start to infuse systems to be more tuned into this before things happen and get a chance to be reaching out and caring for each other to even further reduce the likelihood of aggression and violence. But thank you for the question.
I would like to mention or raise two things that haven't yet been discussed, but might be. The first is the role of pyromaniacs, which can be obviously quite a significant problem at the urban-rural interface, especially when they start treating setting fires as a game against the authorities. The second is the role of organized crime. In the south of Italy, using geographic information systems and others, there is a rule, a policy, a law that when land is burnt, it cannot have its land use change, because what was happening before that rule was that organized crime was burning areas in order to develop them in its own way, and playing havoc with the urban planning laws and plans. So those are just two things that perhaps you might like to comment on.
Well, certainly I'm more knowledgeable about the first. What you're speaking about is kind of weaponizing fire. And when you were talking about organized crime, weaponizing it specifically for manipulating the real estate market and gaming. It was really interesting to build on your first point. There was actually really interesting discussion over the last few weeks. You've seen the rise of these poly markets, of the prediction markets. And there was a way that people were able to bet on wildfires, how many acres would be burned, how one would be contained, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was actually incentivizing people to be able to go set fires, because if I bet on this fire starting and spreading, I can manipulate it. Maybe it's a fire that started naturally, but I could go set a second fire to increase how many, the geographic impact of this, because I'm betting on it. So when you mention this idea of as a game, typically when we look at pyromaniacs, there's a bunch of very, very deep kind of psychological pathologies associated with pyromania that do that. And yes, to your idea of a game, it satisfies some sort of strange, desire or need. But here, a different interpretation of being a game is actually gambling, is actually betting in these markets on when a fire will start, how widespread it will be, the amount of dollars and damage will be, as a way of, again, gaming fire. So you spoke both about weaponizing fire in some ways, and also now this new variation of actually gamification of fire, which is very, very interesting and frightening.
Steve, great presentation, as always, very thought-provoking. I just wanted to throw in a couple of things, actually, in terms of what you said about the sort of pushback on communities. I think there's a lot of scope around this in disaster management. And I worked for the American Cancer Society, and I was with a few other more responsive NGOs in the US at a workshop a few weeks ago, like the Salvation Army and American Red Cross. And in terms of sustainability, in terms of threats to people and disasters, a lot of the theme of that workshop was about going back into the community to see what the community could do for itself to support itself. And so I think that endorsed a lot of what you were saying about that. Because it's just not sustainable, at current levels. And as you know, here in the US, there's been a lack of investment in lots of ways that's coming down the pipe to states and others to respond. So I think that whole community and that integrated approach to resilience is very much part of what our world is today, and how we should be responding in that integrated approach. And just to sort of say, from the American Cancer Society perspective, in terms of climate change and risk, in terms of some of the research that we sponsor, it is something that we've started, I understand from one of our data scientists, we started to look at in terms of the effects of wildfires on cancer patients, especially those, who have pulmonary cancers, etc., is one of those foci. But I also think, having come from a healthcare background, I just wonder about any increase of if you like, short-temperedness amongst healthcare staff in very hot environments, having to deliver healthcare in various ways, whether it's out in the community that they're doing this, or whether it's in hospitals, which, certainly coming from the UK, we're not very well sort of used to dealing with high heat, and certainly some of the older hospitals I worked at as well. So, again, I think there's a sort of carry on in terms of some of these behavioral risks, as well as the environmental aspects of them.
Yeah, so, a good model of this, unfortunately, was the pandemic. When you think about the wear and tear on the healthcare professionals and the systems, is when you see surge. And what we see in heat is two things happening simultaneously. We see a gradual change in ambient temperature year by year, right? And you keep hearing this statement, as hot as the summer is this year, it's the coolest summer you're going to have for the rest of your life. And then you have these spikes, which are the heat waves. And during the heat waves is when we have the surge. And certainly all of that repetitively wears on the healthcare staff, who are always chronically understaffed in most facilities, who are always under tremendous demand. So the burnout rate the increased frustration they have, the increased kind of aggression perhaps of patients and families who are coming into the emergency services or being hospitalized into the units. It creates an increased demand, it creates a surge, and it just more wear and tear on the healthcare system. The healthcare system, is, and you're operating here in the States, Chris, at your former hospital where you are now with the Cancer Society. If you go to nearly any hospital, they complain of chronic short-staffed behavior. And we saw such attrition during the pandemic. So it's not a one-to-one relationship, but I think some of the lessons we learned during the pandemic actually have an applicability to some of what we may see in terms of impact on healthcare professionals and on the field as we go forward in the climate future. Now, having said that, there's opportunities to start doing things about that ahead of time, but how proactive systems will be, that's a different question, right?
Perfect. David, would you like to?
Yeah, just very quickly, Steve, you mentioned resilience and community resilience. And of course, that's fundamental. We can't see these things in isolation. And in order to have community resilience, you've got to pay forward. You've got to,
Right.
you don't become resilient the day before the fire or the day after the fire. It's much more organic than that. And I think that from our perspective, as people involved very lucky to be involved at the policy level in the UK and other places, the question is not only what do we need to do and how do we need to do it, but what sort of society do we think we need to become?
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing some generational changes now. And I think that one of the things that we can do, and which I was expecting to see, people have mentioned it happening in COVID, I don't think it happened as much as it should have done, is that we see very much the role of central government is to support communities who then have ownership of their own safety, security, well-being and resilience, rather than seeing it as something centrally designed and imposed. And I think that actually might be a significant change we're seeing in terms of just of creating genuine responsiveness that has utility and value and can make a difference.
Yeah, I think both prongs have to happen. We say all disasters are local. So you start, and obviously the building community resilience is critical, and what's being done at the policy level for the region, for the country, has to be in lockstep. Both of these things have to be happening. It can't be pushed it can't be just top down, and it can't be bottom up from the community. They have to be integrated, and they both need to happen. And probably most people would agree in this group, they need to happen now. They need to start happening. If they are not already, they need to start happening urgently.
I wrote an article this morning for our newsletter, and the final thing was the best time to have done this was 10 years ago. The second best time is today and tomorrow.
Is now, right?
That absolutely, yeah, with a sense of urgency.
Absolutely. I mean, this was very, very informative. Thank you very much, Steve, for sharing your thoughts. Thank you to everyone for participating. We will be sharing the slides in a follow-up email. But again, let us know how you felt about this session and what you want to hear from us next. As I said, we have a fantastic webinar on Thursday as well on building the resilience for the future. So do join that session as well. And we would love to see you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. It was great to be with you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Steve. Well done.